Hello, my name is Natalie. I created the bullet when I was in a dark place. It is a philosophical podcast that talks about human integrity and freedom, that is influenced by psychological concepts, more mystical or even spiritual ideas, and my artistic stance. However, coming from a dark place, I am not asking why the world is as it is so as to make sense of it, to write yet another scientific essay, to find an excuse for why the world has to be the way it is. I find the society we live in very questionable. I do not like how the modern Western worldview is considered synonymous with objective truth. So when I ask why the world is as it is, I am asking so as to undermine the foundations of a world that, in my opinion, needs to be unsettled and rethought. I think it is crucial to realize that perception is not a tool for finding out the truth. It is how we communicate with the world around us. It is a tool of expression, of self-actualization. And to understand this is to grasp the magic that lies within the gift of subjectivity. I hope that you'll enjoy listening. You just received a message. I will travel back in time, tear apart the sky, break through the thick veil of loneliness, and kick in all the cardboard cutouts, all the scenes of this blank, delusory world you wander through. I will come for you, and you will recognize my face immediately. Finally, you will say, and talk about how you thought that you had lost me, and how it wouldn't stop breaking you into pieces. And I will say, I'm sorry. I need you. I want you. I feel you. And your pain will never stop breaking my heart. Ever. But I want that. This pain is worth feeling. This breaking is a gift, as it makes me feel that I have a heart. And that's why I came for you. That's why I traveled back in time, tore apart the sky, broke through the thick veil of loneliness, and kicked in all the cardboard cutouts, all the scenes of this blank, delusory world you shall no longer have to wander through. And I hope that you'll receive my apology. End of message. Wow. Thought I'd never hear from that guy again. Yeah, I guess I might call him sometime. Hello, and welcome to the second episode, which is called Messages from the Void. So, without further ado, loneliness. Loneliness is a strange thing. It can occur regardless of whether we are in fact alone. We can have friends, be loved, and still feel like we're all alone and nobody loves us. Or we can be alone and not feel lonely at all. Or we can be in one room with a person and feel lonelier than we would if we were actually alone. I felt lonely last week. And somehow my feelings of loneliness during that last week led to me magically becoming more and more incapable of asking for help. I ended up in quite an unpleasant state of needing closeness and support, but not being able to ask for that. I just couldn't get myself to do it, honestly. In fact, I even did the opposite. The more I felt the need for connection, the more I isolated myself. Why did I do that? Why would a person choose to make themselves suffer like that, instead of just trying to go after what they need? How does a person end up in an unfortunate situation like that? Here's an idea. Being in need itself is a very easy mechanism. We want, and so we need to receive. And if we don't receive, we will ask, look, wait, scream, until we do. Very easy. And yes, if we have to ask, look, wait, or scream for a long duration of time before we reach satisfaction, that can become painful and exhausting. But that does not necessarily mean that we suffer yet. See, when we are in need and feel that we deserve to receive, that we will be satisfied, because this is how needing works, right? You want and then you're satisfied. then the majority of the joy of satisfaction already lies in the moment of wanting, anticipating the fulfillment. And the actual realization of our want is merely the world yes-ending our proposition, like a good improv scene. So maybe the suffering, the feeling of injustice we often feel when we're not reaching satisfaction is not so much about the disappointment of not having a need met. Dealing with that disappointment could be as easy as just making our proposition another time, in another place, or to another person. So what is the missing ingredient that can turn that moment of rejection, of dissatisfaction, into a moment of terror and cruelty? The answer is evil. Now, what do I mean by evil? Let's say we are in a position where we are completely depending on other people to satisfy our needs. Childhood. We've all had one, seems relatable. And let's say that for one reason or another, our caregivers in that situation feel that they can't or don't want to satisfy a need we have. Now they're stuck with us, always asking, looking, waiting, screaming for something that's just not going to happen, which is only bearable to a certain degree, obviously. So what to do when they still feel that they can't or don't want to satisfy us? How to make us shut up, how to make us give up on that need. A very powerful and rather quick way to achieve that is to attach shame to said need. Because not only does shame almost guarantee that we won't bring up that need again in a long time, it also serves the purpose of releasing the caregivers of their responsibility and therefore their bad conscience of not having been able or willing to satisfy us. The message of shame being, that is a wrong need, you're not supposed to have that. So now we are not only confronted with the unfortunate situation of not occurring satisfaction, but we are actually left alone with that unfulfilled need, and the idea that we don't deserve and can't find fulfillment, because having that need was wrong in the first place. The word is now not just not yes-ending our proposition, it looks us in the eyes and says, that's a stupid idea and you know it. And we barely have any other choice than to now play along an it scene. Because what has been established is that there's right needs, deserving of fulfillment, and wrong needs that will be answered with shame. That there's good needs and bad needs. That you can be a good child or a bad child. Et voila, we now have laid out the rules to a game that's called Needing Has to Be Deserved, where the more we are seen as good as opposed to bad, the more we are allowed to have needs and the more likely they're going to be met. So if we want any of our needs met, we better play along in that scene and take over that responsibility, which really is the responsibility for the fact that our caregivers couldn't or didn't want to meet our needs. That's unfair, no? But we better take that fallacious control over our happiness by agreeing, yes, I've been a bad child, and do the best we can to be liked again, to become a good person that is deserving of being cared for and loved. And yes, the thought that love and care are negotiable, that they can be earned, can be comforting and make us feel like we have some sort of control over the situation. But by agreeing to the rules of the game, by agreeing that it's our own fault that we didn't get satisfied, we internalize a self-image of us being wrong. Not because we are actually wrong, if there even is such a thing as being wrong, but because, paradoxically, it feels like our only chance to ever being right, and therefore having rights again. And this is truly where the suffering and the desperation start. So it's not about the disappointment of not having a need met, it's rooted in the shameful interpretation of not occurring satisfaction, in the diabolical meaning that's being attached to the moment of rejection. It's when we make the fact that we didn't find fulfillment mean something like, because I don't deserve, because I can't have, because it's wrong to want, and so on. Now, to adopt a self-image like that really paves the way to a whole lifestyle of shame, where we constantly have to fight for love, acceptance, and our needs being met, but where at the same time being a good child obviously can't guarantee or buy us love, acceptance, and fulfillment, as this is not how these things really work. and over again blaming ourselves for the fact that we didn't find love, acceptance and fulfillment yet, or that we've lost it. We become experts in self-optimization. We become perfectionists, the best people on earth potentially. However, being extremely unsatisfied and constantly feeling like shit. As you can probably tell already by the way I talk about good and bad, it's not a concept I like. I think it's very damaging and full of empty promises. To be shamed in our biggest moments of need, when we have opened ourselves up to someone with that urging that makes us human, that really is an expression of life and wanting to live, and to then be rejected and have the idea that our wanting, that our expression of life is wrong, planted into that very open and vulnerable heart of ours. That's evil, right? See, it's very hard to escape evil. It's very hard to think outside of that concept of good and bad, as it's very deeply rooted in the workings of our society and upbringing. Even if we see and understand that we're being damaged by the thought that we're bad and come to question the concept, we'll probably end up just seeing the other person as bad and evil. Sure, now we get to see ourselves as good, which feels like a relief because it puts us in a better position in the hierarchy of good versus bad. But that doesn't really change the problem. That doesn't end the vicious cycle. Because now we have to protect our good selves from those bad people. So as long as we're hooked on the idea of good versus bad, we will either have to protect ourselves from bad influences or be isolated because we ourselves are seen to be the bad influence. And either way will lead to opposition rather than companionship, to disconnection instead of connectedness, to isolation, to loneliness. Unfortunately, this is also how many relationships end, with a taste of shame and bitterness. And that whole story of good and bad, of good and evil, does the same thing to a relationship that it does to a need. It invalidates it altogether, making us feel like the relationship was wrong, a mistake, that the love and connection weren't real. It's hard enough on its own to let a relationship go, to accept that people want to go in different directions, have incompatibilities that can't be overcome, have a different understanding of what they want from the relationship. But it's even so much harder when shame and distrust kick in during this process, when one or both parties feel that it's their fault that the relationship isn't working. Doing the good and evil dance that goes something like this: I feel ashamed, but I also feel like a victim. I feel that I don't deserve what I need, and that I would drive you even more away or hurt you if I'd ask for what I need. I feel that I can trust you to handle my needs and vulnerability with the due respect, sensitivity, and pure intention of supporting me with no strings attached. I am angry because you make me feel like a fuck-up. And that's why I try to be perfect, unassailable, right, justifying everything I do and waiting for a vulnerable moment where you do or show something that could be seen as wrong, so as to deflect my shame and put it on you, and so on, and so on, and so on. So what this does, and one party antagonizing like that is enough, even though very often both parties join that dance, is that it suffocates the trust in the relationship. And what was supposed to be or has been a beneficial bond between people who support each other turns into quite the opposite. And out of fear, out of that shame and distrust, most attempts to fix the situation start evolving around the need to see ourselves as good again, rather than making peace with the other person. And many people would walk over dead bodies just to be able to see themselves as good again. It's quite the joke, no? I think there's nothing I hate more than to see and feel this happening. Knowing that even if I'd managed not to dance along in the good and evil dance, which is really hard to do, I'd still have no control over the way the other person sees me. If they choose to antagonize me, consciously or unconsciously, and for whatever reason, there's really not much I can do. And I have grieved quite a few relationships that ended this way, being slowly or quickly killed and devoured by the monster of good and evil. The thing is, when we decide to do that painful dance, it's often because we feel helpless, and because we feel confronted with so much shame and hurt that it seems easier, meaning less hurtful, if we just throw away the whole relationship, making it go up in flames so as to just undo it. As if we could somehow make that story we had started to write with another person be untold. Of course, that's an illusion. The story does go on. We can tell that at least from our side, knowing that we of course still have thoughts and feelings about the person, probably a feeling of unfinished business, of dissatisfaction. But even knowing that, this illusion, the idea that the other person might somehow be able to successfully delete us from their personal storyline, can make us feel like ghosts. And even though the story does go on, we now don't tell it together anymore and have no knowledge over how the story goes on in the other person's head. And projecting all our feelings, thoughts, needs, wishes onto the other person in that story without ever receiving an answer. No feedback, no reflection where we used to be mirrored. The feeling that we are a ghost gets reinforced. Because as humans we need that resonance to give us orientation about who and where we are, what's happening, how we fit in our surrounding. So when there is none of that, there's a chance that we might interpret that nothingness as a reflection that shows that actually we are nothing. And all our feelings, thoughts, needs, wishes regarding that person and our story get sucked into a huge black void that consumes all and reflects none. And there is no higher form of loneliness and isolation than to become a ghost like that. Really, everything is better than being a ghost like that. We need to be held and seen. And we need to be held and seen in our vulnerable moments, when we're not fine. To think that we're only bearable, lovable, valuable, when we are fine, when we can give to other people, when we meet expectations or can at least talk about our struggles in a way where we're already perfectly reflecting and capable of giving an informative lecture about our problem, that is poisonous and will turn us into people who will strive for being seen as so good and valuable that one day we might be able to afford our innermost wants, wishes, dreams. However, never being able to get there, because we're actually trying to achieve that through choking off these very wants, wishes and dreams. And to be told then that we're good people is like putting a band-aid on a gaping, blood-spurting wound. So I'd say fuck good and evil. And I would like to propose a very radical concept. Trust cannot exist together with the idea of good and evil, of fault, of failure, of shame. They're mutually exclusive. So if we want to connect, if we want to build and have trust with ourselves or with other people, we need to let go of and invest as little as possible in these thoughts. Now that doesn't mean that we can't have boundaries and values, that we cannot like or dislike certain things, people, behaviors. We can very well decide to part ways and move away from the things, people and behaviors that we don't like. But those decisions should not be made based on terms of good and bad, of right and wrong, but by taking responsibility for what we like and don't like, and understanding that we are in no position whatsoever to take over the responsibility for what other people like or dislike. And letting go of the idea of good and bad, of failure, of shame, we might even find a way to pass through that bleak void that consumes all and reflects none. We might be able to create actual hope, a hope that is a notion that someday, somehow, from out of that deep darkness, that eternal nothingness, we might receive a message. Can be a word, an image, a thought, something that will wake us up from the painful delusion that we are a ghost with no reference, no weight. So if you can, open yourself up to receiving that message. And if you can, open yourself up to giving that message to someone. The best thing you can do to accomplish one or both of these things is to give yourself to the world, in whatever way. And don't exclude the aspects of you may have been told are wrong. If you dare, look for ways to especially bring those aspects of yourself and others back to the world. and enjoy giving yourself to the world. Yes, it may start off as an act of rehabilitation from pure necessity, from a moment of suffering, but that doesn't mean that the process can't be or can't become joyful, that the way you give yourself to the world can't be beautiful and of value, not only for yourself but also for others. Can you imagine that? I would love to see that. And now, thank you for listening, and this week's song recommendation is I Trusted You by Andy Kaufman. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and would like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. That is patreon.com/thebullet by Natalie Wendt. There you can find all information you might be interested in. And also feel free to leave me a comment or any personal thoughts you might have. They're all appreciated. I hope that the struggles you might be facing right now would turn into a bullet that would touch what needs to be touched, shatter what needs to be reassembled afresh, and implant the seed of change where freedom is needed. And I hope that you'll have a good week.